Welcome to the Exploress. Time traveling through women's history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. We're veering from our regularly scheduled program to have a chat with New York Times bestselling author Therese Oneill, author of such nonfiction delights as Unmentionable, The Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners, and her latest book, Unbecoming a Lady, The Forgotten Shrews and Sluts That Shaped America. This isn't your average collection of bios about women from history. The ladies contained within its pages were rude, uncouth, and complicated. They didn't just break the mold for a lady in 19th century America. They crushed it under their boots and laughed. So let's let Teresa introduce you to some of them. Grab a deck of cards, a tape measure, and absolutely no Let's go traveling. But first, I'm going to remind you that my second novel, Firebirds, is hitting shelves on August 27th. And it would mean a huge amount to me if you'd pick up a copy. If you do, I'll send you some very special prizes, including a signed bookplate and some Nightbirds-inspired art. To find out how to claim them, check out this episode's show notes, or go to my author website, katejarmstrong.com. And now, I'd like to thank some of my patrons. My newest lady presidents, Anna and Rachel. My warrior queens, Alexis, Amanda, Ika, Jessica, June, Neve, and Sloan, Kate, Samantha, and Sarah. My imperial empresses, Letitia, Alyssa, Faye and Whimsy Soapworks, Katie, Samara, and Teresa. And my lady pharaohs, Cheryl, Kate, Kot, Kimberly, Laura, Lori, Sophie, and the fabulous Courtneys. This show simply wouldn't be possible without the support of all my patrons. Have you ever thought about becoming one? Patrons get all episodes early and ad-free, voting rights on upcoming content, behind-the-scenes stuff, and up to 2 exclusive bonus episodes a month. I've just published a new one about 3 Renaissance painters who rocked Europe with their talent. You can now try out being a patron with a 7-day free trial, so what are you waiting for? Go to my website to find out more.
So yes, I'm Therese Oneill. It's so nice to be here.
Oh, it's so wonderful to have you. I'm a little bit starstruck because when I first started the Exploress, your first book, Unmentionable, was really formative in my thinking about what the show was going to feel like and sound like. And I referenced it a ton when I was writing about women in America in the 19th century. And I have very visceral memories of sitting in my living room reading it and just laughing and reading bits out loud to my husband and being like, you won't believe this thing that women used to be told to do in the 19th century.
It was fun to write. I think I wrote it in 4 months, which is unheard of. And that meant, and also going in those days, you had to go find the pictures. Because I wanted lots of pictures. You really need them to understand what the menstrual belt looked like. And you had to go find a picture that somebody else didn't own, and you had to photocopy it with 600 DPI or higher, scan it same, send it to New York, and I did it somehow. And then even in 3 years' time, all that could be done on the internet. Anyway, I did it with love and pride. I got, mostly because of the era, almost my illustrations for free, or I just assume they are. Nobody's come after me for money yet. Except for my menstruation chapter, I had to talk to the guy who ran. Oh, I wonder if he's still alive, dear fellow. The fellow, he's 78-year-old fellow named Harry, who had a museum of menstruation in his basement. And I found him, and he had on the internet, and he had all this cool information and pictures, and I didn't want to pay for him because I was broke. And so I said, Mr. Harry, sir, you're my Elvis. Can I please have your pictures if I just give you citations? He goes, oh, heaven's sakes, sure. We didn't get into why he had a museum of menstruation in his basement, but we were all happy he did.
Yeah, probably just better not to inquire. I was hoping we could just talk about your origin story a little bit. What brought you to history, to studying and writing about history, and specifically about women?
Well, the lack of knowledge. I mean, I read on your bio that you loved anything that made you feel like time travel, like you were time traveling. And I remembered one of my first um, time travel books I found that made me think about I was mistaken about the past. You know, I read tons of books my whole life, and then sometime in my 20s, I read a book from the 70s called a book by a woman called Marilis Millheiser, and it's called The Mirror. And it's a simple time travel story of this woman lives with her grandma her whole life, and her grandma's basically a living vegetable, comatose, staring at nothing. And then one day she looks in the mirror at the same time her grandma does, and she's transported back in time to her grandma's youth, which is the 19th century. And she noticed right away that the sheets were rough. And I was like, why would they be rough? And my brain just started opening all these doors. I was babbling something about George Washington's cookbook, Martha Washington's cookbook. If you get there's a presidential first lady's cookbook out there, and you can get Martha Washington's cake that she baked for George, apparently. And I started thinking stuff like, no matter what we did, we couldn't recreate that cake. There's a recipe right there, but it's all wrong, and there's nothing we could ever do to bring it back. That says, I mean, just take one ingredient, like a cup of sugar. Okay, they're not talking about our sugar. They're talking about a sugar cone from uh, from Jamaica that they harvested and transported over. Okay, so let's say we made the effort to go find a nice sugar cone from Jamaica made out of cane sugar. It still wouldn't be right because the growing processes are different and the soil is different, and we don't know what the weather was that decade. And that's just one ingredient. And I'm like, oh my god, we can never eat George Washington's cake. And it's tiny, but that was the door that opened it. All these, why would the sheets be gritty? Because of like 7 different reasons. But the thing that triggered the book for real, I like Gone with the Wind, the movie and the book. It is the best tale of a sociopath surviving the apocalypse you will ever read. People think it's a love story. There is no love in that book. There's not a drop of healthy love at all in that book. It's a sociopath surviving the apocalypse. It's fantastic if you read it like that. Anyway, there's a scene in the movie where early on where Scarlett's running across the lawn with her crinoline raised to see her father. And I was like, just out of nowhere, like, how does she fit that in a bathroom? And I'm like, because I was in an apartment at the time. And I was like, they didn't have bathrooms. They had outhouses. How did she, that's even smaller. How did she fit that thing in an outhouse? How did Scarlett poop? How did she pee? And I went to the 2014 or whatever internet, 13 internet, and there was no information. And I was a pretty good researcher even then. God, I was in my very, very early 30s. Um, and I had already started a small collection of, I wish I could lift the laptop up, sexual advice manuals, mostly from the mid-century and before, that just delight me to no end. God bless them. But none of them had that information except what you read in. The only information I found was by those fantastic gentlemen who, the obese woman's face turns red as the fat shoves menstrual blood up into her cheekbones. There was that, but no information about pads and stuff like that. My mother passed away. I couldn't ask her, but I remembered a few things. My grandma would never mention such things. And then I realized the women that could write back then, they weren't going to write about that, like menstruation or peeing or pooping, unless it was potty training. So I started just deep diving all the way down to Harry in his basement. And I learned, well, the first answer I learned was she didn't take the crinoline. First of all, the crinoline was silly and stupid even then. It was just a show of, I can't think of a modern equivalent. It's something we're all going to be like this in 10 years. But a fashion trend. And she didn't take it off. She squatted over a chamber pot. I'm like, okay, I can picture that. And I'm like thinking squatting, but under paint. How do you get under the dress? And I kept digging, and I found my first pair of pantalettes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh my god, the answer is crotchless underwear for all of history.
Yeah. I know. That blew my mind.
So funny, so freaking funny, unexpected, and just led to more questions because, okay, now how do they have their periods then if they have no crotch? And the answer to that was even harder. Nobody, and it turned out any which way you can is how you do it, and don't worry so much because you're probably pregnant or not you're too malnourished to bleed anyway. And I I just and I resisted reading Jane Austen until like last year because I was convinced it was like I don't want to read about a world where nobody has to poop. And I was being stubborn because it's a very nice book actually, Pride and Prejudice. I think it's a very nice background anyway. Doesn't suck.
You and I are just like soulmates, I think, because those are the questions that really drove me to start the Exploress as well, because I always find myself thinking about those everyday
Right?
details. You watch a period film, and I was a huge lover of period films growing up and was like, but how does she pee? Why doesn't anyone ever pee? How do I know how she pees? Like, what does she do about her period? I want to know, but no one ever talks about it. I mean, we talked about the crotchless drawers, which like absolutely blew my mind as well. But I'm wondering if there were any particular facts about the things that women were told in the 19th century that you really enjoyed or surprised you.
Well, the birth control, the all the attempts at birth control. There was one book that was just like straight out up on the matter, honest, and then Comstock came along and ruined that for everybody. Comstock was such a dick. That's a term they don't use anymore. What Comstockery is this? Being censorious when you don't need to be. Um, but they understood the withdrawal method, and they tried to very politely tell you this is how you hold a napkin in your hand like a gentleman would, and just remove and use it at the proper time, and there should be no problems. And I they knew it. They weren't they knew what to do. They had the idea. They didn't have the science, but they had a gut feeling. All the things they did that would shock you, and it was pretty surprising. I mean, it's another thing nobody wrote down. You had to pick it up from dribs and drabs. One of my biggest resources was the Sears catalog and other catalogs that were just coming out in the turn of the century and the 19th century too. Sears catalog had this really big section for ladies' toiletries, and it was mostly depilatory creams and only creams, not shavers. Gillette made us want shavers in like 1911. Brilliant Gillette. Um, and nice little things, mostly powders and talcums, not even makeups, because those were only for the stage or a certain kind of lady. Until Max Factor, bless him. And then there was this buried in this. I mean, and if you look at the old catalogs, they're very verbose and poetic, and for every product, that's why they're so thick. And then buried in all this stuff is this one lady's oval cup sponge. End of discussion. I'm like, what's that for? Is it for bathing like the other sponges? But why did they make a point of saying it's ladies and a cup shit? It's for tying to a string. It's a sponge. It's birth control. And they're not allowed to put it in print because of the Comstock law. So they're just saying, hey, we happen to sell a sponge if you want to buy it. We don't know what you're going to soak it in and where you're going to stick it, but go ahead. I love the cleverness of that. Women working around the restrictions to do what they needed to do all through history. Okay, we're good ladies, don't do this. Well, I ain't getting pregnant again, so I'm going to figure it out. Women are resourceful. Being pregnant is hard. It's necessary, but it kills you back then, and it's just miserable. And they kept finding ways to be okay. Women's ability to find ways to be okay, no matter where they were born and what situation they were put in. I love that. That surprised me too. Everybody, all the men writing in my first book, how weak and silly and prone to illnesses of the mind and uterus, which are, of course, the same thing. And it wasn't that at all. It was women like going, we got this. Just don't stay out of our business. Think the crazy stuff you want. We're not going to contradict you. We're just going to go into the back room and do what we got to do.
The thing that really makes me laugh are these male doctors and experts of the 19th century who were telling women how to manage their bodies and how to manage their reproductive health and just the stuff. I remember reading Unmentionable and some of the recipes for the things that they were suggesting women put on their faces and put in their hair, cleaning products, the way they talked about self-abuse or masturbation and the horrible effects it would have. Like it's going to make you you know,
Wither away your
it's going
life
to give you
force.
boils. It's
Yes,
going to
yes.
make you insane if you self-abuse. Like, you know that women, I wish I could go back in time and sit with one of the women reading one of these books and just to see, because you know most of them were like, they must have known that a lot of this advice was silly, coming from men who didn't understand how women's bodies worked.
I'm trying to think how I feel when I'm pretty sure I understand something medical just from my gut, and then I read an expert, like in the Lancet, who says, "Nope, it's not this way," and I'm like, "Oh gosh!" But then 2 years later, another publication is going to come out and say, "Oh, actually, we were wrong in that one," because that's the nature of science. Is it proper science will keep improving and keep doing more experiments and like, okay, we need to shift our point of view on this. It's actually, we messed up a little correlation causation. Our sample size wasn't right. Here, let's look at it again. That's proper science. So when an educated person tells you something, it can make you question your own knowledge. I mean, I don't know. I like educated people telling me things. I trust them, and maybe women before me were smart enough not to always do that. Because, I mean, if somebody told me I had a red face because my menstrual blood had no escape because of my fat, I don't think I'd buy that.
We're talking about the Victorian era too. So while we did see more women of certain classes going to college and getting education, we also are talking about a culture in which women are told from the time they're tiny that men know best. And that's a hard thing to fight, which makes so many of the women you talk about in your latest book so fascinating because they're all women who went, nope, no, thank you.
And I wonder if there's a correlation between or connection of any sort between how educated a woman was and how it just seems like a farm lady who saw the cows getting pregnant every season would just be more likely to say that's a crock. That's a crock of what that cow makes. No, I'm not doing that. That will work. I need to do it this way because I actually know how reproduction works. And but a lady in her Victorian parlor who has a bit of money and time enough to fuss and worry, I don't know. A little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, isn't it? So that's why I always try and take a tone when I'm going through this. I mean, sometimes you just got to be like,
Mm-hmm.
but when it's not just complete raving lunacy, I try to just step back and say they were doing the best with what they had. That's also a through line in my work. I try to do. Most folks are doing the best with what they have, just like we're doing. And we are going to be someday. Somebody's going to look back and say they kept their appendixes until they blew up. Idiots, or they all drank well water. Idiots, just like we do now. Like they didn't know germs existed. Well, they didn't have microscopes. How can tiny magical animals make you sick in the water? I won't believe that. And they're going to do that to us one day, full circle. And so it's best just to stay humble and do the best with what you have, and don't disagree with your gut.
And you're right. I think that that is the through line, that even though the Victorian era in America was a very different time in so many ways, and we have to remember that when we're talking about the past, there is this really clear parallel of, well, we can only work with what we know now and what we have now. And it's easy sometimes to look at the past and laugh and say, how absurd that they did X or Y. But you're right. We're all doing the best we can. And in 100 years, they're going to look back at us and say, woo, those were some interesting choices.
And also in my new book, they one of the reasons they also wanted me to take out Ida B. Wells is because her story wasn't funny. I'm like, that's okay. I'll just say it's not funny. It still needs to be told. And I'm like, I can do it. It's easy. Just start the paragraph and say this one's not funny, but you should read it. And that's pretty much what I wrote. And I try to be funny, and when it's not going to be funny, I let you know, heads up. But it's still really important, and your life's going to be enriched by taking it in.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about your approach because it I think is pretty in line with what I try to do on the show, in that there's a lot about women in history and women's history. I mean, you were talking about Kellogg, who was a horrible man, and I was thinking about all the examples of women being thrown in asylums and women being mutilated, and just, there's a lot about women's history that isn't funny, but I think coming at it with both curiosity and empathy and some humor when you can helps make it more accessible for us, you know?
That's my goal, and the people who do get upset don't like how the levity I inject. But how can you even tolerate it if you inject levity? You'll just be angry all the time. And again, the levity is acceptable because, with the exception of Kellogg and a couple of lunatics, they thought they had something there. They thought they were helping ladies. They thought, I mean, honestly, if you're having a fit, if you're miserable, I've had Great Depression. You're smart. I bet you have too. Most smart people have that at some point. I've been in a terrible state. If somebody sprayed me with a fire hose, my brain would clear right up. It would work. I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm okay. I'm okay for a second. Thank you. And I'd be grateful that the pain went away from my head because I was, what the heck happened? A legitimate electric shock to the brain sent through cold water, an ice bath, I would feel better. It would help. So they kept doing it, and it looks like barbarism now. Spraying a poor, miserable, depressed lady with a fire hose in her belly or sticking her in an ice bath, but it worked.
That's right. Sometimes you have to laugh. Yeah, sometimes I think you have to laugh, and that's when I first started out, I didn't really aim to be funny. But your work inspired me because I thought you can be empathetic and you can tell you can be honest and you can still laugh because there's so much about history that is genuinely absurd and also enraging, and sometimes it helps to laugh.
Yes, there you go, dear. We may be soulmates. And that's one more thing I in my books. When I dump on a guy, if I'm gonna man bash, he better be awful. Because some of my best husbands and sons are men, and they're doing their best. They really are.
Your newest book is a bit of a departure. Not a departure, but it's just a bit different than your first two. So your first two were more about the kinds of advice women were given about child rearing.
I'm gonna level with you. I love this book. It's a good book. I did a good job, and I love these women. This isn't the book I sold.
Ah,
This isn't the book I intended to write.
okay.
Um, I actually had a pretty cool idea for a choose your own adventure book that I was pretty proud of. I made a flow chart, and I don't even know how to do that. But um, the acquiring editor appeared to acquire that book, um, and then she quit. No, first she changed it. She said, so actually what we're wanting is a bunch of 500-page vignettes of cool women. And I was crushed because I'm like, you mean like the 40 that already exist on the market? The ones I can't possibly, I mean, the Clintons are about to put out. She persisted. I can't compete with that. They're like, yeah, but they're selling them. So make us one of those. I'm like, wait, I'm sorry, did you say 500 words? That's a fifth grader's essay. I can't. I'm a good writer, but I don't think I'm that good. I don't know if I can do 500 words. I said, if you want it, I can do it. I can do anything. I'm good. I love this stuff. Let me do it my way. They said, let me do problematic women. And she said, that sounds fantastic. And then she quit. And so my book was given to somebody who didn't acquire it, who treated it very well, but she didn't acquire it. She didn't fall in love with it on her own. It was her duty to follow through. And she did well by me. She did honest by me. The whole team did. But this was now an orphan book
Hmm.
that nobody had intended. So, but we weren't going to let it go because it's good.
I would love to hear you talk about, like, one of the things I love about this book, and I'm listening to it on audio, which is just an extra delight because the way you write and your tone and your voice is just so irreverent and so funny. It's great. So I'm loving listening to it. But one of the things that struck me is that these women are what we might call complex and also what other people might call problematic women from history. And I love that you focused on women who don't fit a particular mold, who bucked trends, who
I had to fight for some of them.
I bet you did, because we so often want to turn women into angels and heroines, or we break them into these archetypes, and these women, you can't really categorize them that way, and you shouldn't. So I'm really curious to hear you talk about your process for that.
First of all, I thought of people that were just somebody nobody wanted to talk about. And that was kind of my mistake because my publishing team were really happy about problematic women. I should say my editor, the one that left. But they didn't mean problematic women, they meant problematic women. And that means I came back and I said, I said the first woman to ever run for president's got a fascinating backstory. She had a mentally challenged son, and she was a eugenicist. And the editor, she said, "Oh no, Teresa, no one in the book who likes eugenics." I'm like, okay, but all these people are from 1890, so they'd never even met Hitler, and the eugenics that they're talking about, that's everybody. That from Darwin to Helen Keller, they were all pro eugenics because to them it was preventative health. Because they didn't have anything to make you better when you were sick, they focused on preventative health. And they believed in prenatal influence very strongly. And they knew farming because our culture was just scooting out of into the industrial age, away from the agricultural age it had been in for time immemorial. And she believed it was because she made mistakes in choosing a partner. And now you read the whole story of, oh, I'm so terrible.
Is it Victoria Woodhull?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, it is. Yes. So she was a eugenicist, among other things. She was also a spiritualist and probably a scammer. The one thing she wasn't interested in was politics, which I love. She had no intention of running for president. Anyway, but like people like that, I'd have to take her out if they didn't want anybody that had eugenics. I said, "Well, you're going to have to let me reframe what that means because it's every single person." It was the movement of the time. It was medical thinking. The idea of being my kind of writer, of being a historian, it's going to be offensive because it's 150 years ago and our mores change, and our knowledge changes. And we never hold history hostage to our modern sensibilities. If it needs to be behind glass, put it behind glass, but don't erase it. So, and these ladies didn't, what I had to say about them didn't even need to be behind glass. I wrote them raving love letters, basically. Because it was loving, it was amazing. They were amazing, and yes, they were really offensive. I'm not talking about it. I'm standing next to them and saying, look what they did, and telling it in ways that we can understand today. That's my job, is to make this dry stuff really, really interesting.
And I think you talk about writing love letters to these women, and that's absolutely what I felt like as I was listening to it. Is you're talking about women who were rude and offensive and made some, for their time, certainly some bold choices, but you're painting them in all their glory. Like, look what they achieved. And I love that about the book. It's women who are complicated, and you let them be complicated, but you love them for being complicated. And it's like, let's celebrate how complicated they were.
Or at least not judge them, because who are we to judge them? We're not there. We don't. My biggest hater on Goodreads right now is a multi-degreed German ultra feminist, um, ultra smart professor, and she doesn't like that I was making jokes and making light of the Hetty Green, who was a raging capitalist, unapologetically so. And my stance is, yeah, she was probably mentally ill. In fact, she wasn't okay, but she was also a self-made billionaire when women weren't allowed to open a savings account. And I'm not going to say she's evil. I'm going to present the facts to you, and then I'm going to forgive her, which I shouldn't have to do because that's not my place. But I'm going to forgive her for not being the perfect 21st century woman with the perfect 21st century values. And then I'm going to tell you the cool stuff she did and the crazy stuff she did, and maybe even some of the good stuff she did without making her an angel. You've got so many angels. Like, here's something else I'd like to say. So I looked at the book. This kind of book exists. Badass Bitches of History. They're, as far as the eye can see. And they're good books. They're great intros. But I'm like, no Cleopatras, no Joan of Arc's, no Harriet Tubmans. And not just because they've been done to death, but because they're not role models. They're not. They're legends. Somebody comes across once every 400 or 500 years who can do what Ada Lovelace and Harriet Tubman did. If you look at what they did, like Tubman did, was it 30 overland missions on foot to save 70 souls, never lost one. It's insane, the stuff she could do. That's a legend. That's its own category. Let me just tell you about Poker Alice, who was just sort of a badass who lived a long time and did the Old West like a man and didn't apologize to nobody. I'm not saying she's a saint. I'm saying she's cool. Let's learn about her. We like Bat Masterson and Jesse James. What about Poker Alice? She's awesome.
Exactly. It's like, and that's what I love is so many of these women. I spend a lot of time reading about women in history, but I didn't know most of these women. I'd never heard of them before.
There's some deep dive in there, but every woman I picked, she had to have, like, I call them heats. I think I'm stealing that from 30 Rock, but at least 3 different reasons that they're worth writing about. They can't just be the first or something like that. They have to be like every time you dig a layer deeper. What? Like Lane Bryant, you know, the women in my family have been fat since you had to chase down your food and kill it. We were still fat. So when Lane Bryant came along through the 20th century, I love her. She made my grandma and my mama and me feel human. And then I learned that she was a 16-year-old immigrant who couldn't speak English or so. And I learned that she invented the maternity dress, but couldn't publish about it because it was such a filthy word, maternity dress. And that she designed with her husband as an engineer because women's stout bodies were so unruly. It just got better and better. And I wanted to share. Or the mom from Cheaper by the Dozen didn't just have 12 kids. She invented the kitchen. Nobody knows that because she's the mother and she likes being the mother, but she invented the kitchen.
Right. And she was an engineer by trade, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was one of the first ever. She pioneered the field of industrial engineering. She and her husband, who was a cool dude. They were 50-50 on everything. And when he died, she took over and kept going. And they kicked her out and came back into the kitchen door is what how her kids put it. All their old associates who used to work with them, they did after Frank died, her husband, they distanced themselves. And she had 11 children who were all going to go to college, and most of whom were still dependents. And she was a single mother in the 1920s. And so she had a skill that was incredible, but very niche. So she started working for Macy's. She started working for Johnson and Johnson she streamlined I love what she did with just the box maxi pads came in. They weren't even called that back then. Just all the things she researched to find out to make it sell. So her and her husband, Frank, were called in to revolutionize a assembly line factory, which were very common in the time. The Ford had just taken off, and so assembly line factories were all what everybody was doing them. And a lot of women worked on these lines. And Frank said, "Well, they're getting tired." And she said, "They certainly are." He says they need to wear basically Crocs. He said in Sweden they wear comfortable wooden clogs. So let's put them in clogs and they won't get so tired. And she said it, and then she scientifically proved it. Lillian said, American women will not wear ugly shoes. They simply won't. And there are no both comfortable and pretty shoes available in 1910. So she said, you're going to have to find a way around it. And the male way of thinking is just tell them to do it. And she's like, well, you can, but you're not going to get your work. You're not going to get your money. She said, let them have rest breaks. Let them stand next to their friends. And you're going to see a production rise. And then she proved it. So she had this sense, this feminine sense we have, and then she proved it. And she was amazing. But she's just the mom from Cheaper by the Dozen. So I wanted it all in there because it's delicious. And then some of my ladies are just, like I said, Poker Alice just shot a guy. And just, all Poker Alice did was refuse to do it the way she was supposed to do it. Women didn't gamble and go around the Old West without being either good women, which was rough, they probably didn't want to be there, or bad women who were in sex trades that probably didn't want to be there. She was a poker player, and poker was brand new in the time she was there. They played a much stupider game called Pharaoh. She brought back poker and she just slaughtered with it. She was awesome, and she'd make all her money, go spend it however she freaking wanted, come back and make more. Was it a healthy, respectable life? No. But was it? She didn't shoot. She only shoot one guy, and he probably deserved it. But if we're gonna worship Jesse James and Bat Masterson and all them, why can't Walker Alice get some love?
Exactly. Exactly.
And one more. Let me harp one more. The first ever American state senator was a really effective senator like 30 years before women had to vote. And we've never heard of her because she was a Mormon. Not because she was a woman, because she was the fourth of 6 wives. And her story was fascinating. She was effective. She won her seat against her own husband. They both ran for the same seat, and she won. And we don't think of progression when we think of 1890s Mormons, but Utah, but they did, and that doesn't fit the 21st century theme of how women are treated, and so we let that go. Like, that's not fair. She was a Mormon, proud Mormon, and she was a doctor, and she was a senator, and she was the first, and she died unhappy. And it's all true, and it's all good, and let's just say the whole thing.
That's one of the things that I love about your book. We are writing and producing for a modern audience. And while a modern audience who often looks at the world very differently. And so I feel like part of my job with the Exploress, what I try to do is to present women as honestly as I can and to say, yes, the way they thought about things, like you were talking about eugenics earlier. And while that's uncomfortable for us, it doesn't make sense to say, well, we can't talk about or laud any women who were into eugenics and believed in eugenics, because, as you say, it was a pervasive belief at the time.
Including Margaret freaking Sanger?
Yeah, right? Who we do laud, but we never talk about her eugenics because it somehow seems to detract from her.
Right. I mean, we don't talk about Sanger. She founded Planned Parenthood. She hated abortion. They both existed because it was a different world, and that's okay. It was a different world. And yet, the whole thing with speaking at the KKK rallies, okay, that's just plain old sketchy. Let's just say that's sketchy. But she still founded Planned Parenthood. She tried to make it better.
And that's it, right?
She didn't do it right all the time, and I don't know why we don't say, okay, you really did try to make it better, even though it's a little cringy for us now. We understand that then is not now. It's a different planet. It's different rules. They're going to look at us like we're monsters one day. It all just keeps going in a circle. And I'm just that. So I wrote my latest book, with extreme kindness. Somebody noticed that in one of my reviewers, and I was so tickled that they noticed that I wasn't. Because my first book, if they used the word snarky one more time, I was going to punch somebody. I'm not snarky. I'm cheeky. For Unbecoming a Lady, it was just, I don't want to make fun of them for what they didn't know or for the mistakes they made. Who am I to do that? I'm making so many, and they made more of a difference than I have. I mean, it's just so arrogant to think that there's only one way to be a good feminist.
Yeah. Well, this has been a delight, Teresa.
Thank you, Kate. I've had so much fun being here today. This has been really great. Thank you for being as interested in this stuff as I am and as passionate. And thank you so much for existing. Kate, you're awesome.
So are you, Teresa. We are so lucky to have you. Thanks for listening. And thank you to Teresa for joining us. You can find her latest book, Unbecoming a Lady, wherever good books or audiobooks are sold. If you like The Exploress, tell a friend about it, leave a review wherever you listen, become a patron, or shoot me a message on Instagram or an email via my website. Hearing from you always makes my day. Much love to Carly Quinn for all her help making the show. You can find show notes and images at my website, theexploresspodcast.com. You can also find me on Instagram at The Exploress Podcast. Much love to Josh Stackhouse for my theme music, and Mr. Exploress for my logo.